All right, welcome back, everyone. Greetings from Los Angeles. My name is Jeremy Green. I head up Miro's customer success team here in the US. Friends, I am so excited for our next session. What a delight it is for all of us to have David OMalley, Senior Director of Product Strategy from GE Healthcare, here with us to speak about building trust and ownership in product management. Guys, we're going to have such a great time over the next 30 minutes. I'm so excited. A few housekeeping items as we prep for the session. One, we're going to be recording this session and we'll be sharing it after the event, along with the Miro board that David's going to be showing. Also, we're going to have a live QA at the end of the session. So please submit your questions via Slido. I think it's over here somewhere in the link in the hop-in chat. So hop in there, submit your questions and upvote other questions if you'd like to. Well, it looks like we're about ready to roll. So David, I'll let you take it away and I'll hop back in after the session for QA.
Yeah, listen, thanks very much, Jeremy. Really delighted to be here and thank you for all having me. As Jeremy, introduced me, David OMalley, Senior Director of Product Strategy here at GE Healthcare. Again, and to add into that, we're going to be using the Miro board. I will be asking for your feedback and your input, so please join us there. If you can post that link in there, Jeremy, and join us in Miro, that'd be great, right? So look, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about trust and ownership and product management. Just to start off a little bit about me. In my time at GE, I've been lucky enough to be on the vanguard of GE's digital transformation. First Agile, which sent me around the world and allowed me to talk and work all across GE's businesses. And then in product transformation at GE Healthcare's digital technology organization. Right? Now, before GE, I led a pretty normal career path in software engineering. I made things first on mainframes. I go back that far. Then client server, and eventually that little thing you all might have heard of called the internet. And it was about 2008 when that path for me changed. I was a part of a company that started selling software as a service to a market that we had to define and nurture. So we had to empathize with users, trying to achieve goals and deliver measurable business impact to stakeholders. And that was really what we now call the practice of product management. Now, what I've been lucky enough to witness over the years is a broad range of problems looking to be solved by many different people. But they're all trying to do essentially the same thing, which is build the right product for the right people at the right time. I've made plenty of mistakes, seen a lot of worked, what has not worked. I've learned from and been influenced by plenty of other people and their perspectives. And I'm glad to say I've never been the smartest person in the room. The slide I have on here travails some of my journeys around the world with GE. Unfortunately, the one on the side is me standing beside a massive machine head, which kind of shows you the complexity of what we do at GE, which is make big things, okay? So, going through this experience that allowed me to develop over the years certain principles, which I feel should be applied to product management. And today I'm going to talk about the bookends of those principles. Transparency builds trust and ownership drives accountability. Now, I will say I'm going to come at this from a certain perspective, right? I've spent most of my career in product management. However, I feel that these principles matter no matter what your chosen profession or what you do in the product lifecycle. And the context for today's presentation is going to be the world that we currently live in, right? So trust and ownership have always been important. But there was a time when we could get together, talk, break bread, build relationships the old-fashioned way. And we can't do that today. We probably won't be able to do it for a while. So as I like to say, the game's changed, but believe me, the expectations remain exactly the same. Working remotely, of course, presents unique challenges for those of us all here today. And quite frankly, that just raises the stakes. Most importantly, though, I'm also here to learn from you, either through, as Jeremy pointed out, Q&A or some of the interactive sessions that we have in here. So please, I'd love to know as we proceed along your experiences around transparency and trust, right? So let me just dive in here with transparency builds trust. Now, while we're at this, I'd like to perform a little exercise. And so those of you who are in Miro should be able to see where I am. In fact, I think I will use the feature to bring you to me. In here, we have an exercise. I would love to know, when I say that word transparency, what for you transparency is and what transparency does. But there's two other boxes up here. I'd like to know what you feel transparency is not and transparency does not do or does not deliver. There's some Post-it notes here. Please drag them over, edit them. If you've used Miro before, of course, I assume you have, you know the game. And those of you, if you see something that's on there that you agree with, that others have written, please feel free to dot vote that. We'll come back to that a little later, okay? So getting onto this idea of transparency driving trust, if you get to the dictionary and you go and you take a look at transparency and what it means, I'm seeing a little bit of a lag on here. You get a lot of physics types questions, right? It'll talk around, center around light translucency. However, one of the things I want to draw your attention to that's here on this slide is three words: open, frank, and candid. And for me, and I'd love your opinion, transparency is a process of open and honest conversation around where we're going, how we're doing, and what we've learned along the way. So with your permission, I'm going to discuss those three as far as transparency is concerned, right? So first of all, I'd like to recognize that transparency is hard, right? And in larger organizations, it gets even harder, which I think is why it's more critical than ever to communicate your future direction. And you want to do that through three essential artifacts: intent, success, and scope. So if I'm just talking about where are we going and owning that message and bringing your product journey to others, being transparent about that, it starts off with your intent. And if the way forward was crystal clear and it didn't depend on user feedback and there weren't complexities in the world, we wouldn't need product management or even Agile for that matter to solve any of our problems. We just do it, right? But we do live in a complex world. It's adaptive, and therefore we need to talk about the change we intend to drive and how we base that on our current information. More to the point, we need to be crystal clear about the problem we're trying to solve, who we're trying to solve it for, and why. In the Miro board then, just below where these PowerPoint presentations are, you'll see a tool that we use called the commander's intent, okay? Now, simply put, the commander's intent is your product's vision in 100 words or less by answering 5 questions. What we ask people to do here is we ask them to create a narrative based on those 5 questions. And that narrative should be something that is shared to your stakeholders, with your product teams, and to your users in certain instances around the direction and the product priorities that you plan to take as you go forward. One of the other items that I mentioned in here, as far as your journey forward, your vision forward, is success. Now, answer simple questions in your product around just this one. If we are successful, we will ... right? Now, your success should be defined as the business impact that your product wants to drive. It's not your personal success. It should be your business success, and it should be measurable in some format. Your stakeholders need to know that you're building towards their success in order to build up those structures of trust. And then finally, the scope. This one for me is probably one of the most important ones and probably what I've seen get the most value over time. Just like I'm asking you to do in this particular exercise, right? As a product leader, you have to define what your product is and does, but most importantly, you need to call out what it is not and what it does not do, right? So by defining that, you are being crystal clear about the journey that you are about to take, and you're being transparent with that so that you can engage in a full conversation about where you are going. One of the most important parts that we talked about in that 3-part series was how are we doing? Now, anyone who's ever been on a road trip with kids is familiar with that age-old question, are we there yet? And if you haven't been in a car driving with kids and heard that question, you probably have asked that question. Depending on who you talk to, the product roadmap, which is kind of what defines where we're going and how we're doing, is either a holy textbook or a desert mirage. For me, I found that it isn't that roadmaps in themselves are wrong or they're wrong to use. It's that they typically lack context. Roadmaps, product roadmaps in particular, usually have 2 variables. What will be delivered and when, right? Now, those 2 variables, we measure those, we can measure progress against those, but I find that they tend to lack the context required to give your roadmap meaning. What you see on here in this slide, and I actually have it in the Miro board as well, is a 4-quadrant roadmap that still gives your stakeholders those 2 standard variables, but it builds in additional context through more information. And that information is why. You need to explain why you are prioritizing what you are prioritizing right now. Why is this the next thing we will do? The golden feature, of course, is that big splash, the big thing you will hang your hat on. The dependencies, you need to call those out immediately. You need no doubt in mind as to what is beyond you and your team's control and what help you'll need in order to be successful. And then finally, measurements, as in how will you measure the success of this particular roadmap item? Now, this should tie back directly to the success statements that you built earlier on, right? So by being clear in all of this, you are not just telling people where you're going and how you're doing, but you're actually linking your strategy for your product back to your foundations. And you're making transparent your decision-making process to all of your stakeholders, not just the artifacts, but the process itself. Okay. So on this slide here, I want to show you what transparency looks like in a modern organization. So I have 3 photographs up here, 3 pictures up here. The one on the left-hand side is what it looked like when we can actually be together in the office. And you just heard Jake Knapp talk about how he loves the tactile, he loves the physical. I do too. I'm a huge fan of tactile boards and information radiators. This is an example of what was used in one of our offices down in New Orleans. Every team had their own space. They were able to communicate what they were working on, what was next, what were their blockers or their hazards, what were their successes. That, of course, in this environment is no longer possible. We need to adapt. But even in larger organizations, the idea that you can just communicate locally doesn't really work. And that's where your tooling comes into place. So you'll see here in the middle is an example of a pretty standard idea board or idea pool, okay? And I'm sorry, Jeremy, are you catching up with me there? And so, what we have in here is a good example of you sharing the ideas, where it is that you're actually going in the future with your product roadmap, which ones are you prioritizing, and getting feedback from others. And then I think also on the right-hand side, I want to draw into here where you are with Miro. Make all of your artifacts available, make your process available to others. And you'll see on here, this is just a view of the share button that Miro has. I like to set all of the boards that we use to comment so that anybody can come in and see what it is that you're working on or where the source of your truth is, okay? Earning trust is difficult. It takes time, it takes dedication. I think it's important to understand that trust is also given. It's really not earned, it's given by others. It's a process, and your stakeholders will definitely want to know what your process is for realignment when changes happen. And so it's incumbent upon you to build in the process and build in the structures to see that that's available, to allow them to trust you. I'm going to move on here in a moment. I have a few key takeaways down here in the bottom about things that you can do. One of them that I like the most is be that chief context officer. You always want to be given the current context of where you are right now and what's driving your decision-making process. Right? So I'm just going to take one quick moment. I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to see, wow, we have a lot on the transparency board. All right. So building trust, I think definitely in there. Engagement, no secrets. I love this one. Create a sense of safety and a positive culture. I think that's great. Let me just give a look over what it does not do. Egocentric company politics. I think that's really good. Yeah, transparency does not solve every problem. Absolutely. And it does not ensure good communication. I think you're 100% correct on that. We'll come back to a few of these, I think, as we move through and get into the Q&A portion, right? Ownership drives accountability. Now, I just want to move on to this aspect of what we're going to talk about today. Accountability has many forms in the world today. So we often talk about holding leaders accountable, for example, their actions, their inactions. Usually to be accountable is to answer for something. In our context, that's usually results, right? But too often in matrix organizations, product leaders have accountability without authority. And we do hear an awful lot of buzzwords being used, like hold people accountable, again, for what they did or they didn't do. Those levers of accountability usually come in the form of carrots and sticks, right? But the idea of holding people accountable is a lot tougher in reality than it looks on paper. We're going through an election season here in the United States, and we often talk about holding leaders accountable. A little statistic for you is that 90% of everyone in Congress gets re-elected every election cycle. That's a serious statistic. So, accountability, holding people accountable is hard, right? It's hard to do. From what I've witnessed over the years, I'd like to replace that word accountability because I think it really lacks one thing, one critical element, which is ownership. Now, on the Miro board, one of the other exercises we have in there is I'd like to know what ownership means to you. I'd like to be able to come back to that again, right? Moving forward, in his book, Drive, which is a recommended reading for me if you ever get a chance, Daniel Pink shares a study of what motivates people all over the world, regardless of their location, their ethnicity, their anything else. It boils down to 3 essential ingredients: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, we just talked a little bit about communicating the why, right? So that's the importance of purpose. Mastery is really about ensuring that people you are expecting to do the work have the tools to do so, right? So a little outside the bounds of what we're going to talk here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about autonomy and its effect on ownership. It's moving over here onto the right side. If I was to show one slide or just one description of what ownership is not, it is this. We build ownership in our organizations really by including others in the process. I think you just heard Jake Knapp say that as well, right? So when you're creating that commander's intent, when you're defining your success, your scope, include your teams, include specifically your stakeholders. I mean, don't just report out to them or run it by them or make sure that they're informed or they consent. Actually have them as active participants in creating that future that you're trying to drive through your products in your organizations, right? Ownership is a process of ensuring that people feel that their ideas are your ideas, right? As product leaders, you're going to have to coach, not instruct. And what you see up here on the screen is definitely that process of coaching. It's that bullhorn, dishing out requirements. And then finally, I think really in order to drive true autonomy, you're going to have to allow people to do what they do best. And that's, some people are good at defining problems. Some people are good at solving problems. You want to make sure that they're set up for success in doing what they're able to do. So moving on about if that's what ownership is not, what is ownership? What does it look like in reality? What you see on here is a few photographs, and this is an example of some lean workouts that we run to achieve exactly what we're talking about here. So over the course of 2 days, we would go about building the product foundation, some that I've already talked about, and the strategy with product leaders, team members, and stakeholders in the same room, and some users on occasion, answering the same question. This allows us to leverage the fact that we have people with different perspectives sharing knowledge across different teams, right? I'll give you an example of that. We have business stakeholders at one point define what value means to them. And in the same room while that's happening, the technical developers get to share their thoughts on complexity. Now, complexity it is to create solutions. So when somebody asks, are we there yet? They have the context for understanding why certain things are difficult or take a long time. What you'll actually see on here is, on the left-hand side, this is actually a mass prioritization exercise that we were running through. And up here on the right-hand side, I mean, again, this I believe is out in Bangalore. It's a business modeling exercise with all of the teams and all of the stakeholders in the same room. Okay, so of course, getting back to today's world, we just can't, travel and perform those physical workouts. I think some mechanisms are really, really important in this process. The Together Alone system The idea of being able to borrow from some of the items that are done in Sprint, right? Is use your timers, use your dot voting, allow people time with their Post-it notes to contribute their voices without that fear of judgment, without that fear of people talking over them, right? The coaching aspect, keep your conversation short, and allow people to be able to participate through using power questions, right? I think, and on that vein as well, I definitely wouldn't be here today. I don't think I would have been able to drive the success were it not for, in particular, using Miro as a tool. And so just kind of moving here onto the last slide and leaving this here with you today. I remember that there was a time that I was actually about to get on a plane and go to Bangalore to run one of these workouts when COVID hit and we couldn't go there. So we went through a process of talking about how we were able to take, what we used to do in person and make it work online. And I can tell you right now that just by getting good at this, we're now able to deliver the same workouts and and drive the same results in the same amount of time through virtual medium, as opposed to the physical medium. Now, there's things we have to give up, but there are actually things that we get out of this. I told you at the beginning, the game's changed, but the expectations haven't. But I think we really have an opportunity here, everybody who's here and everybody who's leveraging these tools, is not just to have the game change on us, but to actually change the game. Quite frankly, being able to use these virtual environments has allowed us the ability to engage more people over a wider geography and more often. That's a game change for us. I think the challenge for all of us in dealing with this and in moving through this is not just to react to the complexity the world's now brought to us, but it is actually to change the game and to change the culture that we are driving in our organizations and to our customers, right? I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to switch over to Q&A. I'm also going to be able to come back to some of those Miro board. And again, in the interest of driving ownership for you of this presentation, I'd love you to help me make this presentation better. We do have a retrospective down in here. I would love if you would be able to give me your feedback on this immediately or afterwards as we move through things. Okay. Listen, thanks for your time. Jeremy, you have a little Q&A going on?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, David. Again, we really appreciate you sharing your expertise here on how to build trust and ownership in product management. We do have, it looks like about 7 minutes for QA. Do you have a few questions popping up here in Slido? As a reminder, you can jump into the QA session here by clicking on the link to the right of your screen. David, one of the questions, and one of the folks is asking, they'd like a little bit more specifics on how you host lean workouts remotely.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I don't want to just, there's a lot of work that goes into these things. And so we do have a pre-engagement structure where we are, we're picking the right problem to solve, first of all. We are ensuring that that the people know why they are there. There's some standard form welcome letters. The people we work with want to know what they expect, the expectations are when they come out of this. We want to know who's involved. So there's a certain amount of choreography that goes into that. I don't like to over plan with these things. I do like people to be in the moment and to just be able to work through. So from my perspective, they have to be very, very structured. There has to be time boxes associated with just about everything. A certain amount of flexibility is there, but pretty much we've got to start, we've got an end, and we've got to fill up that time with a lot of work. As far as the, some of the ins and outs are concerned, I think we have everybody, first of all, needs to join in one of the Miro virtual boards. I have templates created usually that allow us to move from point A to C, B to C to D through the process. And it's usually led by someone like myself or somebody else who is a coach working through these lean workouts. So there will be a lean coach, in this case for product management. And look, it's really just about engaging people through the process of like what you see on here, right? People answering certain questions, moving Post-it notes on here. And then we instead of dot voting, we actually use the voting structure an awful lot and get to answers. get to answers quickly. As I like to say, I don't mind if you're wrong. I just want you to be wrong quickly, because we can always go back and do it again if that's the case.
Awesome.
Another question to your point is yeah. I'm sorry. Don't forget there is pre-engagement that needs to happen. You need to set things up. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Awesome. Another question from the audience: can you give examples of how to make sure everyone gets their voice and ideas heard?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, using the Together Alone system. I think I'm sharing the screen right here, and I'm taking a look at the retro. I would set up a bank of everybody who is in here. So you've got the name, you'd have a bank of Post-it notes. So it's really about giving people an answer. So I would ask them to go through this retrospective, for example, and then I would specifically go from top to bottom, call the people out. They can only read out what's written on their Post-it note, and then they move it over to the appropriate area, right? And so that's an example of, even if they've said essentially the same thing as what other people are, we want to make sure that their voices are heard by allowing them, it's their thought, it's their idea. Make sure that they get to present their thought and their idea, okay? So it's top to bottom, very specifically, everybody's got to talk. I do like to insist that everybody comes on camera. That is a little bit difficult in today's environment with people working at home, so there's a bit of give on that. But you got to come off camera, you got to come off mute, and you actually have to introduce what you've said, even if that's question mark. I don't know. I don't know is a perfectly good answer, and it actually drives some transparency around who does and who does not know, and it gives stakeholders and leaders a good sense of what they need to do to fill in some of those gaps.
Cool, David. Sometimes product managers or project management is about holding people accountable that don't want to be held accountable, i.e. stakeholders with other priorities. How do you apply that to your approach?
Yeah. Well, like I said, ownership, it's really about the ownership. I mean, again, like, if you think David OMalley is going to come in and go to a completely different organization and say, I want that person, held accountable or marked down on X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's just probably no one's going to listen to me, right? And so it's not to say in an organization that we don't have, standards that we expect people to participate at. And, and I would say one of the huge things that, we have at GE is, we have people who want to do their best. So number one, I am taking this off a sort of a good faith understanding that people come to work and they want to do their best. If they don't, that's different, right? But I think I don't go in. I hope I was pretty clear on that. I don't go in and just say, look, I'm going to do the carrot and the stick thing. By inviting people in and giving them ownership on something, it's then down to their sort of internal motivation to say that they want to be a part of this. They want to drive it. It's their baby, and they care for it, right? And so what I'm encouraging everybody to do is, push the bounds as far as you can, as far as accountability is concerned, and whatever your company culture is, be a part of that. But bring ownership into the equation. Allow people in, allow them to be owners of that, and they will feel like it's something that they need to do in order to drive their own personal success. I just feel that is the missing ingredient to what we need to make this successful.
Awesome. I think we have time for about one more question here, David. This one comes from Roseanne. She says, a lot of product owners seem to come from engineering backgrounds. Do you think that product owners coming from UX or UI design backgrounds is possible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I do. I mean, look, we could kick off a huge conversation around, what is product management? How do you do product management, et cetera? I really think, as I like to say, the process of product management is really about defining the problems you need to solve and then going about the best way of being able to solve those. I don't rule out anybody as far as being able to lead that process. As long as they think you got to follow some sort of methodology, you've got to follow some system. But no, I absolutely feel that product management is good for a variety of backgrounds. and definitely connect with me afterwards. And I think that brings us to the last slide on resources here. I would just say, as we're running out of time here, definitely, I'd love to continue the conversation. I'm free to hold on here if anybody else is, but definitely connect. And I think that that's some of the items that we could definitely touch on. I think that was Roseanne. I recommend a few books in here if you want to explore this a little more around drive. Extreme Ownership is a really good one. And then I put in a few links and places where we can connect and continue the conversation. Until then, of course, thanks for your time.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for joining us again today. We really appreciated your words. As a reminder, this session is recorded and will be shared after the event. And hopefully we'll see y'all at the next session.